Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our first Philanthropy Lunch and Learn for the new year. I want to welcome you. For those who are new, my name is Jennifer Hilliard with Leading Age, and I am the staff liaison to the Leading Age Philanthropy Network, and I'm certainly glad to have you all here today. We have a really great program today. We have Ife Adaba, who is with Harbor Compliance, and Ife is going to present to us about charitable solicitation compliance. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Ife.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm assuming you can still hear me, correct, Jennifer?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to assume everybody else can as well. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today, and I'm excited to be here, and even more excited that this is your first presentation of the year, so hopefully we set a high bar for whatever comes next. To give you a little bit of background about who I am and who Harbor Compliance is, as Jennifer said, my name is Ife Aduba. I'm the nonprofit partnership manager and a compliance specialist with Harbor Compliance. Here at Harbor Compliance, we partner with organizations in every state and over 25 countries abroad to help them solve their most challenging compliance problems. Our clients really range from some of the largest organizations in the country to fast-growth startups, and we have a deep industry expertise that allows us to fully manage government licensing compliance for the nonprofit sector. So on your screen, you should be seeing just a few of the charities that we help keep compliant across the United States. So my role is first and foremost to be an educator on compliance and the various requirements facing nonprofits. I also look for opportunities to connect and partner with nonprofits and others who care about and support the sector. Today's presentation, we're going to cover the top 5 things that you need to know about charitable solicitation compliance in particular. So most of this is really geared towards charities, and my understanding is I think the majority of the audience, if not all of the audience, are fundraising professionals who are working within a particular organization. So hopefully this should be right along the lines of what you need. So what we'll cover today, first, state registration requirements. We'll talk about online fundraising, why compliance should be a priority, what it takes to register, including some of the costs involved, how to manage registrations and simplify the process. We'll try to keep the presentation about 45 to 50 minutes so that there's some time at the end for some Q&A.
And just so you know, everyone, I've got all your lines on mute presently, and I will unmute them before we get to the question and answer period.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Typically, when we're talking to an audience, there's usually a range of understanding about charitable solicitation compliance, from people who are completely familiar, they're pro, they know exactly what has to happen, to some who are really just, hearing about it for the first time. So hopefully we'll present this in a way that covers that range well enough for everybody. So we'll start at the beginning in terms of looking at the requirements. First and foremost, you need to know exactly what we're referring to when we're talking about state registration requirements, so we'll break that down. In the simplest terms, charitable solicitation is fundraising. Compliance is meeting the various IRS and state requirements that allow charities to fundraise. So today we'll focus on the state requirements, specifically the requirement that charities register in order to solicit donations. We do like to highlight this quote from the IRS that you should be seeing on your screen. Many states have laws regulating the solicitation of funds for charitable purposes. These statutes generally require organizations to register with a state agency before soliciting the state's residents for contributions, providing exemptions from registration for certain categories of organizations. In addition, organizations may be required to file periodic financial reports. State laws may impose additional requirements on fundraising activity involving paid solicitors and fundraising counsel. So as you can see, generally charities are required to register before they begin soliciting. Charitable solicitation requirements are really based on the act of soliciting, So that key word that you're going to hear time and time again in this presentation is soliciting itself, not necessarily just the receipt of donations. One of my favorite parts of this presentation is this very map that you're looking at right now. For me, it kind of illustrates the beauty of states' rights across the United States and how they impact charitable solicitation requirements. What the map is going to show are the states that have licensing requirements for charitable solicitation. The states that are in dark blue require only registration. States that are in that yellowish color require registration and disclosure statements to be included on solicitations. And then the states in the light blue require only disclosure statements to be included in solicitations. And we'll talk a little bit about disclosure statements a little later on in the presentation. Many nonprofits wonder whether charitable solicitation requirements apply to their organization and in what states. Chances are an organization that fundraises will face the requirements one way or another. Again, the requirements are based on the act of soliciting, regardless of whether or not donations are received. So this is an audience that I think is generally pretty clear on what solicitation is, but for the point of being certain, solicitation is simply asking for donations. And as you know, that can take many forms. The most common ones that people are familiar with are typically fundraising events, mailing out letters, placing phone calls to prospective donors. Some methods that states generally treat as solicitation that are often surprising to people when they start thinking about fundraising registration include applying for grants, collecting membership dues, and collecting donations through an organization's website. Additionally, using professional solicitors, fundraising counsel, engaging in commercial co-ventures, these things all not only trigger the requirements, but they can be scrutinized by states in even greater detail. Also, for any for-profit entities that assist charities with fundraising, generally they need to register with the state as well. Many organizations solicit using several of these methods. As you well know, the idea is to build a development plan that has several different strategies as part of that plan. Any one of them can trigger state registration requirements. Many organizations also solicit in more than one state. So knowing where your organization is required to register means that you're taking a close look at your solicitation activities in each of those 41 states that have some sort of requirement. If you're soliciting in any of these states, you may be faced with the requirement to register there. Online fundraising is a huge topic that comes up, and we get questions about online fundraising a good bit. So it's important to know what charitable solicitation compliance, how it relates to online fundraising, and what the implications are. People often ask, if we fundraise through our website, does that mean we have to register in every state? Or if we fundraise online but only receive donations in a few states, do we still need to register in every state? So certainly nobody should ever feel alone if they are having these questions run through their head. Organizations throughout the country are facing those same uncertainties. Most charities nowadays fundraise online. In my past history, I spent a lot of time working as a fundraiser, and the excitement about online fundraising was that it did exactly what we hoped it would do. It would open up borders and give us a much further reach at less cost. A lot of organizations accept donations on their websites through the Donate Now button. In some cases, maybe you have communications staff people who have changed the Donate Now to some other language that they think will hold even more appeal to potential donors. In addition, charities commonly make solicitations by email, including asking for donations in their email newsletters. Social media is another form of solicitation. And all of these websites allow charities to solicit residents in every state at just the click of a button. Of course, this raises questions about how to comply with state charitable solicitation registration requirements. So in order to clear things up, in 2001, the National Association of State Charity Officials, also known as NASCO, met in Charleston, South Carolina, to try and develop guidelines for when an organization would need to register. I will say, as we talk about this with different audiences, there's usually a mix of people in the room. Some have heard of this event, and the result being the Charleston Principles. Others have not. Basically, the Charleston Principles suggested that if you have a Donate Now button on your website, you should be able to required to register in a given state if you either send targeted emails to the resident of that state or receive ongoing, repeated, or substantial donations from the state. The biggest problem with the Charleston Principles is that, and this is at the admission of the authors of the Charleston Principles, they were really just an academic exercise. They were never codified into law and aren't useful for determining registration requirements. Fundraising online is generally considered soliciting nationwide because that Donate Now section on your website, emails to newsletter subscribers, and social media are all solicitations that can reach citizens in every state. When charities receive donations as a result of those solicitations and then follow up with those donors to ask for additional donations either by email or any other method, those charities are then furthering their charitable solicitation activities. Generally, when you're looking at receiving a donation online, even if you didn't directly solicit that donation from that individual, they just came across your website and decided to make the donation. Once you acknowledge that donation, you're basically seen as being engaged in a relationship with that donor. There are some practical approaches that charities can use to be compliant when they're fundraising online. The most comprehensive way to be compliant would be to register in all 41 states or to file for an exemption in the states in which your organization might be eligible. For many organizations, registering in all 41 states is the best option so that they can fundraise nationwide by any method, including online, while not risking the various penalties and risks associated with not being registered. And I'll cover those risks in more detail in a moment. Of course, we do recognize that not all organizations have the ability to register in all states. There are budgetary constraints that are a common challenge, particularly for smaller charities. For these organizations, the second approach might be better. What I will say is typically when I'm sharing this information with a group of fundraisers, none of them like the second option, but we share it anyway. With this approach, an organization registers in as many states as they possibly can, and then specifically exclude the remaining states that require registration from where it accepts donations. So this would mean that an organization places language on its website or makes some sort of indication that it does not accept donations from those states where they aren't registered. Ultimately, organizations have to weigh the cost of registering in a state with the opportunity cost of not being able to accept donations there. We, of course, encourage organizations to register and focus on compliance rather than try to fly under the radar. The penalties for non-compliance can be severe, so we strongly encourage organizations to take the path of compliance. So the question is, where do we need to register? Given what you know about the requirements and when they apply, we'll take a look at what needs to happen. First, you want to check to see which of the 41 states you are soliciting in. You would generally need to register or file an exemption in each of these states. Exemptions are based on the type of organization, its solicitation methods, and its revenue. Ironically, most exemptions need to be applied for and also renewed. The best way to become compliant is to research thoroughly your specific registration and exemption requirements in each state where you solicit. Even though your organization may be exempt in a state that has a revenue threshold for exemption, again, it's generally the act of soliciting that triggers registration requirements, not the receiving of donations in each state. A great way to take action towards becoming compliant is educating your organization on what solicitation means and the various activities that trigger the requirements. And we strongly recommend that you talk to all the people who might be involved or have some sort of interest, whether it's the fundraising staff, your executive directors, or even your board. So number 3 of your top 5, why compliance should be a priority. By now, you're probably realizing that you may need to register in a few states. In some cases, you're thinking that you potentially have to register in all 41. And again, we realize that this can sound very overwhelming, and it definitely is a significant project. Presenting this information to other people within your organization often elicits a few common responses. So what we've heard from our clients are they hear things like, we've been fundraising for years without registering, and we've never had any problems, so why should we care now? Or, if these requirements have existed for so long, why are we just hearing about them? And sometimes even, do we even need to bother complying with these requirements? While the requirements have existed for many years, states are becoming more stringent with the enforcement of charitable solicitation regulations. State agencies that once served simply as registration offices now have CPAs or prosecuting attorneys on their full-time staff, and those individuals are helping to audit, investigate, and prosecute illegal activity within the nonprofit sector, including those relative to charitable solicitation laws. And they do so to protect not only their donors in their state, but also to protect legitimate charities as well. In fact, there's an Urban Institute survey of regulators out there that found that fundraising abuses are the most common area of enforcement by state charity offices, and these are followed by trust enforcement and governance. So what are some of the risks and consequences of failing to register? As you can see here on your screen, you may be looking at things like fines and penalties, bad PR, or the embarrassment that can come from that. You could lose state recognition of tax exemption. You could have your right to solicit completely revoked. There can be other enforcement actions, audits. There's even some liability for your officers and directors. And this is all on top of missing potential grant and donation opportunities. One example, California, in fact, holds board members personally responsible for any penalties that are levied against an organization that fails to register. They're not allowed to pay the penalties out of their general fund. Instead, it actually comes out of their own bank accounts. Another example, and this kind of falls into that category of bad PR and embarrassment, is a few years ago, the Attorney General of Ohio was holding fundraisers for a charity that was in fact not registered within the state. This is the guy who, in his role as Attorney General of Ohio, oversees all charity registrations in that state. So needless to say, once the press got a hold of that story, he caught a lot of flack from his constituents, and brought a lot of embarrassment to both himself and the organization. These are all things that we know are important to avoid and certainly can interfere with our ability to fundraise successfully for our organizations. So no doubt, while the negative consequences are out there, your organization can avoid them by taking steps towards registration. The benefit of a proactive approach is that it generally avoids penalties, rather than invite investigations or further scrutiny. I have a quote that I'll share from the former Pennsylvania director of the Bureau of Charitable Organizations, and it was taken from a speech that he gave to a group of nonprofits that really explains his take on why it's important to be proactive. What he shared with that group is that if you're coming in voluntarily, even if you have been violating the law for 10 or 15 years, you always got a pass. Bottom line is, you want to try to register voluntarily. So as you can see from that example, the state wants to encourage organizations to register and maintain compliance. They're not looking to chastise groups for trying to do the right thing. In fact, states are more likely to try to resolve a missed registration through informal resolutions, correspondence with organizations, or settlements than through fines, penalties, or litigation. In the end, proactive registration is the ideal option. Charities, of course, have an obligation to be compliant in every state in which they fundraise. Organizations that raise funds in every state must generally register in all 41 states with requirements. That may represent a substantial investment of both time and effort, but the upside is tremendous. It's basically a license to fundraise without borders and without inhibition. Not only that, but it could even result in increases in revenue. There's studies that have shown that charities that include disclosure statements, which are part of that solicitation registration in many states, on their solicitations get a better rate of return. That's because donors gain reassurance from the fact that the organization they're giving to is, in fact, compliant. No responsible donor wants to give to an organization that doesn't follow the law. And the reality is that at this point, consumers are being taught how to research the organizations that they are donating to. There's information up on state websites, coming out from elected officials, encouraging their constituents to research organizations, give responsibility, and really are driven by that need to protect the citizen. At the end of the day, charitable registration requirements are law. Your organization should treat these requirements just the way you do a 990 filing, a financial review, or an audit requirement. Registering for charitable solicitation and renewing these registrations should be included on your organization's list of ongoing tasks, and costs associated with it should be budgeted line items. Frequently when asked, I encourage clients that we're working with, organizations that are asking the question, to always keep a line in their budget specifically for compliance, and that includes fundraising registration. If your organization hasn't faced any corrective actions to this point, then this is a great opportunity to become registered and prevent them from ever occurring. Becoming registered provides your organization a license to solicit and apply for grants. Your registration status is reflected in the state database for charities, which donors and grant makers can very easily access at any time. In fact, 92% of regulators indicated that they conduct internet research on nonprofits regularly. Some of your more sophisticated corporate and individual donors are using these databases to look up the charities they donate to. So it really only makes sense that you'd want to make sure you are registered and active with the states for these reasons. In the most basic sense, maintaining legal compliance is a best practice for nonprofits and is a major area of things like the Standards for Excellence Code of Ethics and Accountability. We often are sharing best practices with each other in terms of strategies for fundraising, major gifts, different areas specifically. Compliance is just another area that should be part of that conversation. Fundraising and licensing compliance are important aspects of running a lawful and responsible organization. The first step towards compliance is sharing these facts with your executive leadership, and as I mentioned earlier, ideally your board of directors as well. Your organization's leadership has a lot at stake, both personally and in terms of their duties as leaders of the organization. Oftentimes, board members are not fully aware of the requirements, the risks of noncompliance, or the benefits of investing in compliance. Now that you've understood these details, this is a great time to take the initiative to start that conversation within your organization. It's important to emphasize to everyone that they become educated on the topic and advocate for prioritizing compliance. A great place to include this, or maybe as part of an ongoing conversation around the role that your volunteers or your board of directors play in your fundraising plan, this is a great opportunity to also be talking about staying compliant and registration. Now, oftentimes, there's a lot of different ways that fundraising registration is handled with an organization. Some are doing it in-house, some are contracting out, maybe your auditors or legal counsel. Some cases, some aren't registered at all. So that leads us to number 4 on our list of top 5 things. You need to know about charitable solicitation, and that is, what does it take to register, including the costs. So we've talked a lot about when your organization is required to register and where, but let's talk about what it takes and how. The details in each state are very different, of course, but on the whole, you can think of getting registered in 4 phases: research, apply, monitor, and renew. So we'll start with research. It's important to know your current status prior to filing anything. And that's basically whether you are not registered or in compliance or in bad standing. Depending on your situation, you'll have a specific application, a state fee, usually based on your revenue, supplemental documents like your 990 or your IRS determination letter. In some states, there are certain prerequisites before you can register to fundraise. So for instance, you may have to foreign qualify the nonprofit corporation and appoint a registered agent. So knowing these requirements up front will help you to save time and avoid any kind of rejected applications. Once you've researched what's necessary in each state, it's time to apply. In each state, you will have to complete the necessary applications accurately and compile required documents. This often takes a line-by-line review of a form and instructions. Once you're sure you have everything, you have to ensure proper delivery. Sending the applications to the right agency and address is pretty obvious, but you might also be required to file online or by email. You may have heard of the Unified Registration Statement, or the URS. This document was created in an effort to streamline the application process in all states. However, not all states accept the document, and many require additional supplements to be included. The URS itself is longer and more complex than regular state forms, and frankly, a lot of state examiners do not prefer the URS over their own documents. They take longer to approve a URS than they do their own forms. So what does it all cost? As you might suspect, the answer depends on the organization in terms of its annual revenue and also the number of states it is registering in. What we can do today is at least answer this in some general terms. So from where you're sitting, maybe give a little thought to what your gross revenue was as you reported on your latest 990. In some cases, maybe you haven't filed one, you're under $100,000, maybe you're at $1 million plus. So if you want to register in all 41 states, your total state fees would likely range from about $1,400 to $5,000 for most organizations. Keep in mind, this is an estimate of the total fees if you were to register in all 41 states. We sometimes get confusion. It's not a per state cost. In fact, a single state's registration fee is usually reasonable, $25, $50, or $100. Sometimes there's no fee at all. So since many of you might not have to register in every state, this should be reassuring. Most states are simply not that expensive to comply with. To give a rough idea of what that might look like, applicants with under $100,000 in gross revenue are generally on the lower end of that $1,400 to $5,000 range. As you approach $500,000, you'll probably fall somewhere in the middle, and applicants over $1 million in gross revenue per year are looking at the higher end of the fees in order to register nationwide. Once your applications are submitted, you have to monitor your registration status and see them through to approval. And it absolutely can be a waiting game. Some states take just a couple of weeks to process your application, but in others, you may be waiting for several months. During that time, you'll be busy ensuring that they were received and are being processed. An even bigger challenge is resubmitting rejected applications, dealing with state errors, and creating a system for tracking all of the registration information and renewal dates moving forward. Many of you probably already know how much of a time commitment this can be. For those of you who haven't personally done these registrations, you can expect to spend hours researching and have weekly, if not daily tasks managing the filings. Tracking application acceptance and renewals without technology is really difficult, too. Of course, it's usually an executive or high-level staff that has to take care of this. If it's you as a fundraiser, of course, you're thinking of the gifts that you'd like to be soliciting rather than the registration forms that you need to complete. Bottom line, you can think of better uses for your time. The time to completion of initial registration can be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months. Some of it varies from state to state and what the state processing times are, but through efficient management of the process, sending in the right applications, and complete applications can all ensure that the processing times are on the lower end. States, of course, require you to renew the registrations. Most states have annual renewal periods. However, a few states renew biannually. Tracking renewal dates and making sure they are filed on time is extremely important. With this in mind, we can talk about how to manage compliance on an annual basis. To move forward, begin to identify the states in which your organization is required to register and develop a plan to become compliant. So finally, for number 5, I want to talk about how to manage these registrations and hopefully simplify the process. Just like with initial registrations, you'll again prepare a state renewal application, determine the appropriate fee, which is usually based on revenue, and compile the required supporting documentation. The difference between initial and renewal filings is that renewal filings have a hard and fast deadline. The states usually assess penalties if you miss a deadline, so again, it's really important to stay on top of these. As the organization becomes registered to solicit, it's important to keep excellent records of license numbers, registration dates, and due dates. You'll need to have a good system of tracking this information in one place. A lot of our clients have some combination of an Excel spreadsheet or calendar system for reminders. We find they aren't always helpful in tracking changes in state requirements and monitoring extensions of time to file. This is something else you'll need to be mindful of. I will briefly mention extensions. If your 990 and financial data aren't ready before a state deadline, you will have to file a request for more time to file the charitable registration. It's kind of similar to your 8868 extension with the IRS, but in each state the process is, of course, different. Filing extensions can give you much needed relief while you're waiting for your 990 or audit, and that allows you to stay in good standing. Finally, about 25 states require you to include specific disclosure statements on your solicitation materials. You'll remember that from the map that I showed you earlier. Disclosure statements inform donors where they can find more information on your charity's leadership, finances, and activities. These statements should be listed on appeal letters, websites, and other places where solicitations are made. Like everything else, disclosure statement requirements also change. So it's important that you stay informed of the changes and update your solicitations accordingly. And remember, studies show that donors respond more favorably to solicitations with disclosure statements on them. It certainly adds credibility to what you're sending. Managing compliance will eventually become second nature to you, just like filing a 990 each year. But you can still expect to spend a lot of time preparing and tracking renewals. You also need to stay abreast of any legislative changes. At any time, reporting requirements and due dates change. States add and remove registration requirements as well. Sometimes the states are nice enough to tell you when this happens, but the best way to actually know what's going on is to follow the industry. You can't count on them notifying you. I'll take a little time as we near the end of the presentation to just tell you about our solution. As we've talked through the various complexities that are involved in managing both charitable solicitation registration and the renewals. At this point, hopefully, we've also conveyed the importance of charitable solicitation registration and why your organization should be prioritizing compliance. If you know your organization is not yet registered in all the states that it should be, and you're not yet under any sort of government inquiry or audit, this is your opportunity to register proactively. In doing so, you'll be avoiding the potential consequences of noncompliance that we talked about. Remember, we generally don't see government agencies open investigations or impose sanctions on organizations that register in good faith. Really, the best outcomes can be achieved through proactive registration. All in all, charitable solicitation registration across the 41 states can demand hundreds of hours from a qualified individual, both initially and ongoing. We're talking about a substantial drain on staff time, which is why we're here. We're going to take a few minutes to just provide a brief overview of our services. We fully manage each and every step of the process, from research to preparing the applications, cutting checks for the state fees, compiling and mailing out the packages, doing the necessary follow-up with the states and monitoring the approvals, loading all of that information into our tracking software and sending you the approvals. We really do reduce every bit of administrative work on your part. Going forward, our software tracks all the information for you. Again, you don't have to lift a finger on the renewal applications. We'll do that work for you as well. Really, you just need to provide signatures on the applications and send us your updated 990 financial data, etc., as required for applications. To be clear, the software is for reporting purposes. It's not intended to automate preparation on the applications. Our specialists actually prepare these applications for you. What we've found from experience is that no software can effectively account for all the contingencies that are at play here. None would be sophisticated enough to take into account the infinite number of complexities involved in choosing the right state forms, completing the applications, determining the state fees, filing the exemptions where needed, completing the follow-ups within the states, etc. So for these reasons, we manage all of the applications ourselves by hand in-house. What our software does offer, and what you get through our service, is the reporting insights. Our software will inform you of the current statuses of your registrations, the state fees, and the renewal dates, all of which can help you to plan and budget. And your colleagues within your organization are easily kept abreast of your registration status. This is a great report that you can present to your boards so that they can rest assured that compliance is being taken care of. We do have a client portal that allows you to add as many users as you would like to an account so that you, at no additional fee. So your leadership, staff members, and even outside counsel or accounting teams can access the software. The image that you're seeing on your screen gives you an idea of the type of reports that the software can create. I'll take a moment to briefly mention that we also offer firm-wide partnership opportunities. Some of you may be connected to your accountants or your auditors in a way that, and they're currently handling the service, and it might be worth a mention to them. Our nationwide registered agent office network allows us to help you no matter where you're fundraising, and the unlimited user model lets everybody identify the role that they're going to play and get involved, whether they're a for-profit or a nonprofit. Our approach is also to provide full service management at a flat rate per state. Our services are billed on an annual basis. We don't use any hourly billing. You'll get to take full advantage of our team of experts to manage the process for you, and again, limit the time that you're spending on your end facilitating signatures and sending 990s. This makes for much easier planning and processing on your end, and you can prepare your budgets well in advance. So before we jump into the questions, I just want to encourage you, my information is here on the screen. I want you to please feel free if you don't get a chance to have your question answered today or something comes up later as you're thinking about the information that was presented, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. If I can't answer your question, I will absolutely connect you with somebody who can to make sure that you get some specifics to your organization dealt with. Jennifer, I don't know if you want to jump in terms of kind of guiding us through the question period.
Sure. I'm going to unmute everybody right now. I have to mute and then unmute. All right. Do we have any questions? Oh, it looks like it. Hold on. It looks like I have to unmute everybody individually because the mass unmute did not work. So hold on. We've lost a lot of folks, so it shouldn't be too bad getting.
Of course you have to hear them all hanging up.
All right. Do we have any questions for Iffy? I hear some typing. Once again, folks, do we have any questions?
We were unable to see the screen, and so this may have been on the screen, but what is the cost for this service?
Iffy, are you there? For some reason we can't hear her. So I would you couldn't see the screen, so you don't have her information, correct?
Correct.
Her email is iaduba@harborcompliance.com. So I would recommend trying to contact her that way. I don't know what happened and why we can't hear her, but the software platform today has been extremely buggy, and I just wanted to apologize to everyone for that. Usually it works pretty smoothly, but today things are just not cooperating. I see all kinds of lights blinking and people going on and off mute, and it's really kind of crazy, and I don't know what happened to Iffy. So she's still on the call, but apparently she can't hear us. So I guess we will conclude for today. Everyone, I appreciate you calling in, and we did record the session, so I will be uploading it to YouTube. So if you missed the visual portion, that should be available to you on YouTube. I will send around a link to that as soon as I get it uploaded. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.